Welcome to Dancing Through It with your host, Leslie Cooney, the podcast where we share honest conversations about passion, perseverance, and the power of movement. My guest today is Erika Mayall. Dancers, today we have, not just dancers, sorry, everybody, welcome to the Dancing Through It pod. I'm your host, Leslie Cooney, and today we have an incredible, wonderful woman who is so knowledgeable. And while she isn't currently a dance teacher, she is super important in terms of how we all stay healthy and whole and not broken. And advocating for ourselves and our health as dancers, we have the most amazing Erika Mayall, physio to the dancers of the Lower Mainland and all the people. I'm so happy to have you here today because I know you're a busy lady. And so I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat today.
I know. Now you're on, you also have your own podcast. So now you're on like the other side of the table.
Yep. Now I'm the one getting questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be, no, I'm just kidding. But it's kind of weird to be on the other side, to be honest, like whether you're a teacher and then you're getting feedback like on your, work or what have you, like to sit on the other side of the table can be, I know for myself, can be tricky.
Absolutely.
So instead of me maybe telling everybody about you, why don't you tell us about your dance journey, what it sort of looked like and how you got to where you're at today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, like many people within the dance industry, started dancing when I was really little. My older sister danced, and so, I was on the side and participating. And one day the teacher was kind of just like, why is she not in this class? My mom was like, well, she's not old enough. She's still only 2. She has to be 3. And the teacher was like, whatever. She knows what she's doing more than the kids who are in the class. So just like send her in or whatever. So I started dancing, when I was not yet 3. And just fell in love with it. I don't even remember my earliest memories of dance necessarily because I was so little, but I never remember my life without dance in it. Just, kind of participating, watching my sister, all of those types of things. And then, as is fairly typical, just as I got older, it was like adding, one more style, one more class. And probably by the time I was like 8 or 9, I was dancing quite a lot, like dancing in sort of like the little performing company our studio had and doing, I think, pretty much like all genres that are available back then.
In the 1900s, as
I know, in the 1900s. I was just going to say, so I grew up before dance competition was a thing. So I grew up in the Lower Mainland, and those of you who are old enough to remember, I did the festival circuit. So there was Surrey Festival, which still exists, but it was also like Pac West and sort of festivals that no longer exist. So we did do some festivals, but other competitions were not a thing. Sort of like competitions as we know it today did not exist. But I went to a studio that was very syllabus based. So we did the ISTD syllabus, which is not as common in this area as maybe RAD or some of the other syllabus, but it covers all the genres of dance. So we did ballet exams in ISTD, but we also did tap exams, modern exams, and jazz exams. So that was kind of our training model. And for me and my personality, that was a really good fit. I loved exams. I loved the structure of the like syllabus and seeing the progressions from year to year. I was not the kid who loved performing the most. Like I did enjoy performing, but I actually liked class. I liked training. I liked going to like syllabus ballet class. And that is certainly not the norm for a lot of kids.
Right.
I think now looking back, I know it was because I really liked figuring out how the body was moving. Like I liked the biomechanics. I liked knowing the technique of steps. Like I had teachers growing up. I was really fortunate. My teachers were very, very technically based. And one of my teachers was an examiner within the ISTD. And so there was a big focus on the technical element of things, and especially like our ballet teacher in particular as well. And that was what I really enjoyed learning about those. And I remember like even, picking out corrections in classmates and stuff, like not telling it to their face necessarily, but noticing things like biomechanics or things like that were going on. So from a young age, I think that was always like my interest, whether I could articulate that or not. So I didn't, when I was sort of like heading towards graduation, I didn't have big aspirations of becoming like a professional dancer or going. A lot of my friends that I grew up dancing with went on to dance, cruise ship contracts or other kind of commercial dance opportunities and things. And some went on to companies and stuff as well. But that was never really my aspiration. So I always kind of assumed I was going to go down the teaching track. And so the
Nice.
studio really supported me in that. And I did start the ISTD teacher training and was teaching little kid classes like at the studio and all of that. But at the same time, so this would have been when I was like in high school, like a teenager, I had a few injuries and ended up going to physical therapy or physiotherapy, depending on what country you're in and what you call it. And kind of experiencing that and experiencing the lack of knowledge that those physios had in terms of dance. And they were fabulous physios. And it was sort of the physio clinic that all the local athletes from, I went to a very athletic high school. It was the physio clinic that all the athletes went to. So we'd all be like at physio before school in the morning. And the physios who were working there knew exactly how to relate to and what to do with the basketball players and the wrestlers and the rugby players and whatever. And then they were like, oh, and you in the corner, maybe do 10 more reps of that exercise. Like they just like didn't quite understand or know dance. So right away, I kind of identified a like lapse in coverage, like healthcare kind of coverage for dancers. And that really sparked my interest in maybe looking at more kind of a healthcare path. My mom was a physician, so I always grew up like around sort of like medicine. And I was really interested in sports medicine. Was like, I'm going to become a sports medicine doctor, work with dancers. And my mom was like, that's a terrible idea. You should be a physio instead, because I think she recognized that I would really enjoy the interactions with my clients. And doctors just really don't get as much follow through or as much time to spend with their patients. And so you kind of come in, you do a one-off consult, like maybe you have 10 or 15 minutes and you send them on their way. And that's sort of the model of healthcare. And especially like back in the day, it wasn't necessarily a great model that was happening in the healthcare system. Whereas physio, we get to spend a lot more time with clients. And so that was kind of probably good advice that my mom gave me. And so anyway, I realized I was like, yeah, I do think that this is a path that I would really enjoy. I was always quite academic. I really liked sciences. I did all of the sciences like all through high school. And so I felt like this was a good way of challenging myself like academically, but also in the back of my mind the entire time going through like my schooling, I knew that my goal was to eventually end up like back in the dance world and to really like bring these services to the dance world. Because at the time there was very little in the way of dance specific physio anywhere in the world, but certainly not where we are like in Vancouver. There was basically nothing happening, but even in other parts of the world, there was a little bit in New York and in LA and some of those big centers. A lot more happening in Australia at the time, but most places in the world, it was not necessarily a specialty field. So that's changed a lot. But that was always my goal.
It brings me so much joy to talk to someone like you, because there's just so much available to dancers outside of a performing career, even though that might feel harsh or heartbreaking and tough to swallow. But if you do have, like you're talking about, you took all your sciences, which like, oh my word. I mean, okay, I took chemistry and biology, like all the way up to grade 12, as well as calculus, but I don't use it on a day. Like you're using it. I'm not so much. But like for those students who, you know, maybe you love math or, you know, history or what have you, like there's so much available to still be in the community and be a part of the community without having a performing career. And like, we'll get into this, but like to me, and I think to a lot of folks, I'm like, man, Erika's like so successful in what she does. She's so helpful. We need someone like her. I'm so grateful that you exist in the community, because it's so needed. Like you were saying, it's just a realm of healthcare that even now, like we know we need it, and we have, you know, I won't even maybe say a fair bit of it, but like it exists. There's people we can go to, but it's still, we need more that support for the community. It's still
like an emerging specialty. Like I often term it as like, it's still underserved. And so
that's
there are not enough practitioners, whether it be physios or doctors or other healthcare professionals who specialize in dancers. There are still not enough of them compared to the number of dancers we have. Like it is certainly much, much, much better. And there's a bigger knowledge, even just among the public or the dance community, that we exist. Like people before would be like, I didn't even know
Right.
I could go to somebody who specialized in dancers. Now I
Yeah.
feel like people are seeking out dance specific healthcare.
Yeah.
But it is definitely still an underserved population. And especially when you get away from big urban centers, like, you know, every big city in Canada, I get messages all the time from people saying, hey, do you know anybody in Toronto, Montreal, Calgary? And like, I do know people in those cities, but when somebody messages me from like Lethbridge or from,
Yeah.
I don't know, Thunder Bay or like places
Yeah.
like it is still super underserved in smaller communities across, I mean, everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. You had mentioned that there was sort of maybe a stronger base of this in Australia. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I thought that was so interesting. Do you know why that might be or how that came to be?
Not exactly is
Okay.
probably the most honest answer. I think they were just a little bit ahead. So Australia has a very robust physiotherapy profession there. Like they've
Okay.
a really integral part of the healthcare system for a long time. And even our training models in Canada of like how we train physios is based a lot off of Australian and also British, but Australian
Right.
models. And
Interesting.
so it is a really well established profession, I would say there. And to the point where the public, earlier than in Canada, the public had more knowledge about direct access to physio. And what I mean by that, and I know there's probably people listening from all over, and it is different in different countries, like the
Right.
US is still really different. But
Yeah.
in Canada, physio is what's considered direct access. So you do not need a referral from your doctor to go to a physio. You can just like go find a practitioner, find a clinic, make an appointment online, and like show up. And that is the case in Australia as well. And it has been for longer. And I would say it's just been like ingrained. They have a really big sporting culture in Australia.
Yes. Yes.
And so I think it comes from that like the idea of physiotherapy in the sporting culture was really established. So then when it started to spread to the dance kind of area,
Right.
it caught on faster. There are a couple of like sort of like industry leaders. So a lot of people are familiar with Lisa Howell, and she practices in Australia. She's actually from New Zealand, but she lives and practices in Australia. She has done a lot in terms of like education and kind of advancing the profession there. And then the other thing, and I don't know if this plays into it or not, but just like kind of anecdotally or things I've noticed is there is a higher percentage, I have no stats to back this up, by the way, but there is a higher percentage of teachers in Australia who are certified through one of the governing bodies. And RAD is very, very common in Australia.
Okay.
In terms of just like the percentage of teachers that have like an RAD qualification or other qualifications.
Right.
Versus like in North America, where that seems to be less of a trend. Like we have more teachers who just become a dance teacher because they grew up dancing. Whereas in Australia. And so I think that also then lends itself more to those teachers maybe being more aware of healthcare services that are available to their dancers and therefore referring their dancers more. So I don't know. I think it's like a combination of a lot of different things, but they were certainly ahead of at least Canada for sure. But even the US, like there were pockets of it in the US, but only really in the big like entertainment cities like LA and New York. Like you weren't finding much in say Seattle or like other places at that time. We're like, this is also many years ago, but yeah.
I think it's nice, like obviously we're both based out of British Columbia, and the fact that we don't need a referral to go to some of these practitioners is such a nice barrier free in some ways, you know, way to get healthcare, which I appreciate because so few people like have a family doctor. So it's just nice to be able to like roll up and get that. Personally, I feel very lucky that I have never had to go to a physiotherapist. And so quite naively, I don't really know the difference between some of these healthcare providers, like say, as you know, a stretch therapist, an RMT, a chiropractor, a physiotherapist. So can you talk a little bit about like what a physio does or like who a physio is for, particularly in terms of like a dance, say like a competitive dancer who's like 14 years old, like just tell us a little bit about what your practice looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good question because there's definitely overlap between a lot of those kind of professions. And we were really going to like silo them. we kind of sometimes will talk about, so massage therapists deal mostly with like soft tissue. So they're sort of like working on muscles.
Yeah.
Generally, it's fairly passive, like where you're lying on a bed and they're like massaging you.
Love it.
Chiropractic would be more like, again, this is like kind of when we're siloing people, they would be more like dealing with like joints and bones. And so they do more like manipulation of things. They're working potentially more on like alignment and things like that. And then physio, we kind of are like, well, we do like a little bit of everything. So we do like muscle stuff, we do bone and joint stuff, but we do more of like the exercise or like the rehabilitation sort of part of things.
Right.
That is not 100% true anymore, because there's a lot of chiropractors who do a lot of really active treatments and really are, into prescribing exercises. And there's even, massage therapists who will do that type of thing too. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of what practitioners can do like within their license. The biggest difference, I guess, well, I don't even know if I want to say it's the biggest difference. There's differences in the sort of like the training that people have had. And so, massage therapy, the training program is a lot shorter. It's not a university-based training program. And so they don't have as much ability to diagnose injuries necessarily.
Right.
So there's, sort of small differences like that. But a lot of it really just comes down to finding a good practitioner. And so like, there's people who are like, oh, we don't have a physiotherapist in the town that we're in, and our only option is a chiro. And I'm like, well, are they a good chiro? Are they interested in working with dancers? Like, can you teach them about dance? Do they know? Like, they might be like a really fabulous practitioner for a studio to have a relationship with,
for
even
sure.
if they're not a physio. So there is a lot of overlap for sure. But for people coming into my clinic specifically, because we are physiotherapy, we will do sort of like a comprehensive assessment of the dancer, and it depends what they're coming in for. We like to do a lot of preventative stuff. So I get dancers coming in for just preventative kind of like, they'll come in at the beginning of the season for like a screening assessment. And in that, we're looking at all sorts of things. We're looking at alignment. We're looking at muscle balance. We're looking at strengths and weaknesses. And then oftentimes looking at what their goals are. So they might come in and say, I really want to work on my jump height this year. And so then we're looking at, okay, what's your strength like? What's your power like? Is there a difference from the right side to the left side? Things like that. And then coming up with, exactly.
I'm like assessing my body. I'm like, oh no, like as you're talking.
So that's kind of, and those are the clients I actually like to work with the most. Like that's the most fun. We can do the most fun things like in rehab, because then we're like coming up with like fun creative exercises and coming up with programs that work for them and their schedule and the genres of dance they're doing and things like that. The reality is a lot of people who are coming in because they already have pain or an injury. And so then we probably are spending more time assessing that injury, assessing the severity of the injury, and then coming up with a treatment plan. And a lot of that is then managing their like return to dance. So whether they're having to stop dance completely or whether they just have to like pull back on what they're doing, or we can modify a lot in dance where we're like, okay, we are, maybe you're not going to jump for a few weeks, but you can do other things or whatever. And so a lot of dance.
Your arms still work.
Exactly. So a lot of it's like modifying and then coming up with kind of like a, progressive rehabilitation plan to get them back to where they want to be. So that's probably what we spend more of our time doing. But the preventative, or I sometimes call it like performance optimization type appointments, where people are just coming in more preventatively, or they just have like goals of like, this is what I want to work on.
Right.
Those ones are like fun. Like that. You're not having to tell them, okay, you can't do this and we're modifying this and all of that. It's just like, hey, this is what we're going to work on to get you from like X to Y to like, improve your performance.
We know a dancer loves to be told that they can't dance.
Yeah, absolutely.
What a nightmare.
Yeah.
The worst.
Well, and that's like one of the reasons why I feel so strongly that dancers should have access to dance specific healthcare. And again, I agree. Not just for physio, but for doctors or, chiros or whoever it is, because there are very, 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 very few times that I have to tell a dancer they can't dance at all. The vast majority of the time, what we're doing is modifying what they're doing. But if you go see any type of healthcare practitioner who really doesn't understand dance, their instant response is going to be to say, take 2 weeks off dance, take 6 weeks off dance. Like, don't do that. Like, they don't understand it enough. So to have somebody who understands and can say, okay, we're going to limit your turnout to this, and we're going to limit like how many releves you do in a class, and you can do these types of jumps, but not these types of, like, we can really be specific about how we're modifying it, which most of the time means that the dancer can still keep going to class or can still keep participating to some degree.
For sure.
It also means that if I tell a dancer they can't dance, they usually do listen to me because I do it so seldomly. Like, so rarely am I saying like, you can't do anything or you need to take a full break. So if that is the case, then I do have better compliance than like somebody who goes to like a GP who's just like, oh, I don't understand dance, just don't do it. And the dancer's like, well, I can do like a lot of things in class. I'm not going to listen to you.
Right. And I always get a little, my hackles kind of go up when I have a kid who's like, oh, my doctor said I had to take like 4 weeks off dance. And I'm like, there's no way they would tell a competitive like ice hockey player to do that. Like, there's absolutely no way. And then I get all riled up and I'm like, okay, like get off the soapbox for a hot second, like that person. So yeah, that's, again, I'm so grateful. And even just practitioners who also like trained as dancers and maybe, maybe they don't specifically work on dancers. They have that knowledge. So if you go to them, it's so nice. You were talking about real talk injuries. And while prevention is ideal, which again, I will say, is true. Take care of yourself. We only get one body. What, in general, would you say, what are the most common, or what are you seeing a lot from dancers who are coming into your practice for, like what sort of injuries are we looking at? What's happening?
Yeah, good question. Kiddos? So I can tell you what the stats are on
injuries. Get into it.
And then I can also tell you like what we see in the
great.
Clinic. So statistically, about 75% of dance injuries are overuse injuries. And then about 25% of them are like acute. So that's like an injury that happens all of a sudden where you like, land funny from a jump or like whatever it is. So that's, statistically speaking. And then statistically speaking, about 50% of injuries are foot and ankle injuries in dance. The vast majority of injuries are lower extremity injuries. Very little in terms of like upper extremity and that type of thing. So 50-ish% is foot and ankle combined. And then we have like hip and then knee and then low back and those types of things. So that's just like from statistics, and that's taken from a variety of different levels of dancers. Like a lot of the studies are a little bit murky because they'll look at like, one will look at professional dancers, but then one will look at like adolescent vocational dancers, and then one will look at college modern dancers and stuff. So the numbers kind of can vary depending on what studies you're reading, but across the board, those are pretty consistent numbers. In terms of what we see in the clinic, that definitely, I would say, holds true in the sense that we do see more overuse or like chronic injuries than we do acute injuries, but it's probably not quite 75-25 because the acute injuries are the ones who are more likely to seek out medical care. So if somebody like, rolls their ankle and they land from a jump and it swells up like crazy, like they're probably going to go to physio. But if somebody has like a sore back and it's, been sore for 2.5 years and they've just kind of continued dancing, they may or may not seek out physio treatment. So I would say our numbers are maybe more like 60-40 in terms of like chronic acute, but I don't think that that's a reflection of what's happening actual numbers wise. I think it's just who seeks out help. Right.
That's a really good distinction to make, particularly, again, not to paint the dance community with a broad brush, but that feels so honest to be like, oh, I have this nagging twinge, or, oh, I did this thing and it's been with me for, 6 months or whatever. And we just kind of go, well, let's just keep on keeping on. And you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't really seek out treatment until
they can't keep on. And that's kind of when they come in. So when they're like, how long has this been bugging you for? I don't get a lot of people who are like, oh, for like 2 or 3 weeks. It's usually like, oh, like 6 or 8 months. Or like it started at the beginning of the last dance year. And then it's kind of, gotten progressively worse. So that's definitely, sort of more of what we see in the clinic. And then in terms of like actual injuries, we certainly do see a fair amount of foot and ankle injury for sure. And again, probably more of the acute stuff is foot and ankle injury. And then the kind of chronic overuse, because we work a lot, like most of the dancers we see are kind of adolescent competitive dancers. We certainly work a lot with like adult dancers and stuff as well, but most of who we're working with is adolescent kind of competitive dancers. And in those dancers, I would say sort of from a chronic overuse perspective, we're most often seeing knee and hip injuries or like pain in those dancers. That tend to be the more chronic overuse where they're just like, my knee's been sore for 6 months or whatever, but I just keep dancing and I put a brace on it and I keep dancing or things like that. So, not hugely different than like what the actual statistics tell us, but like maybe slightly different just given who our population of dancers are.
Right. All of that, like to me, like all of that makes sense. Like in terms of like a kid, totally, like everything's lining up. Everything, really tracks in terms of like the type of injuries you see on the parts of the body. Like all of that makes sense. But maybe like let's flesh that out a little bit in terms of particularly, I think the chronic, not the acute injuries that you're seeing come in. This is mostly coming from overtraining or overuse. So can you flesh that out a little bit in terms of like what that means to you when you see someone come into your clinic who's like, oh, my hips and my low back have really been sore for like, 6 to 8 months or what have you. And they're like a competitive dancer.
Yeah. So when we talk about kind of like overuse injuries, we often talk about sort of like overtraining, and that can look different for different people. So when we talk about overuse, essentially what that is we are asking the body to perform at a level that is beyond its current capacity or beyond its capacity to recover between training sessions. And so for a lot of dancers, and especially because of the age group that I work with a lot, and I always joke that like all my clients are between 11 and 14. And then as soon as they turn 15, they're like, see ya, and they like never come back again. But they don't need to. Like they stop getting injured so much. But a lot of that can have to do with like adolescent growth spurt and things like that. And so we will often see, sort of muscle imbalances develop. And because they grow really rapidly, so they get like taller really quickly, their center of gravity changes, all these things change in the body, there may be relative muscle weaknesses that develop. But generally, dancers continue to dance and train at the same level, or oftentimes around those same ages of 11 to 14, their training level actually like skyrockets quite a lot. Like the difficulty level really increases right around that same time. But relatively, they're actually weaker. They have less muscle strength. They have less muscle endurance. They have lower bone mineral density temporarily. So they're at more risk for like bone stress injuries and things like that. So there's all of these things physiologically that are happening in their body. So when we talk about overuse injuries or overtraining, it's training that's beyond the capability for their body in that moment. And so it's not always this dancer who is dancing 45 hours a week or things like that. Like sometimes it is, like there are those situations. Yeah. But we sometimes get dancers coming in who, on paper, when you look at the numbers of hours a week they're dancing, it may not be crazy. Like it might seem really reasonable, but when we actually look at them physically, if they've grown 5 inches in the last year, their body just can't keep up. It hasn't had that time to accommodate. Or sometimes we get the dancers who, maybe they're not dancing tons, but then they're also doing track and field at school, and then they're playing volleyball, and then they're swimming, and then their family likes to go mountain biking on the weekend. And so they just, again, are kind of operating beyond the capacity of their body to recover between training sessions. So overuse can look like different things in different dancers. And sometimes it is just like flat out, like they are training too many hours in dance, but sometimes it has more to do with relative to their own capacity within their own body.
Yeah. I think that's such a great distinction, because when I think my snap judgment, like my initial thought of overuse is kids who are training like way too much. But that specificity of it's beyond the capacity of that body at that time. And again, like you make such a good point of that growth spurt or that change in the body, but the training doesn't change. Yeah. There's
we don't acknowledge that their body is like changing and they're having to like relearn a whole new body. And we're just like continually pushing their level.
And you've got 12 of those people, 12 of those bodies all going through those changes at different times.
Yeah.
Within this class structure that you're trying. Holy smokes.
Yeah. And it's also like different bodies just inherently have different capacity too. And so I think it gets really hard because, you know, a dancer or a parent or a family will be like, well, so-and-so's doing X number of hours and they're fine, you know, and so there becomes that comparison. And a lot of dancers struggle. They're like, why am I getting injured? But my friends never once had an injury, but we take all the exact same classes. And so much plays into that. Like, it's not, again, just the number of hours. It's not just the training. It is your own physical capacity. And so we're not going to get like too complicated, but you know, if dancers have like a hypermobility disorder or things like that, like their capacity is not going to be as high as somebody else's capacity. And so we can't automatically assume that every dancer has the same capacity for, you know, training and rest and recovery. And we see this a lot, like even in professional ranks in companies where like they all have the exact same schedule, like week in and week out. And some dancers, you know, by the end of the season are completely overtrained, depleted, like they've dealt with all these injuries, like they're burned out. And other dancers are like, well, I could just keep going. I'm totally fine. And, you know, it's just all of our bodies are different.
Yeah. But is there a correlation in terms of like body structure, muscles, like these sorts of things that are sort of genetic that do help certain people? Because I'm just thinking about myself. I'm like, I really never had a serious injury while I was dancing, which I'm like really, really grateful for. And I look at my body type versus like maybe some of the other folks I danced with. And I was like, oh, we had very different body types. And like our feet are very different. And they had a lot of trouble with their feet. And I didn't have any trouble, you know, like that, those sorts of things kind of go through my mind. So I don't know if if that carries any water.
Yeah. I mean, so again, from a research perspective, we don't have enough information. Like dance science is not an old enough field for us to be able to like, you know, have any information that like delineates injuries to that extent at this point.
Right.
Anecdotally, so there's like this quote from this guy's, his name is Zach Long, but he's a physical therapist in the US and he actually works like mostly with CrossFit athletes and stuff. So he's like not in the dance world at all, but he always, when he's teaching courses or like whatever, he's always just like stronger people are harder to kill. And so that's always like his thing is like, okay, we really want to focus on like strength.
Right.
And so he works a lot with like CrossFit, but then he also works a lot with like older adult populations. And he's like, and we have absolutely oodles of research to show the correlation between strength and longevity and, you know, whatever. We also have loads of research to show the correlation between strength and injury prevention.
Right.
So, you know, extrapolate that to the dance world. And in general, stronger dancers are probably going to be less likely to get injured. Although I don't think that we can like universally say that across the board because strength is also relative to our body type and our body shape.
100%.
So what we do see is that dancers who potentially have imbalances in strength are probably more predisposed to getting injured. Right. And then I kind of vaguely touched on or mentioned like hypermobile dancers. And there are classes of hypermobility disorders. So this is not just like your quote unquote flexible dancer. These are actually dancers who physiologically have like increased mobility in their joint structures. And some of them have underlying connective tissue disorders. And in those populations, they often do have a harder time building strength. It takes them longer and they just have a much harder time building strength. And so they often, we will see probably a higher percentage of those dancers struggling with injuries as well. But, you know, again, it's like a correlation with strength. So I don't think we can say for sure that there's like one body type or that type of thing. Like where, these people are going to be more or less likely to get injured. But I do think it all comes down to sort of relative strength for your own body. So can you control your own limbs? Can you control yourself against gravitational pull and things like that? And if you can, and you have adequate strength for that, then you're probably less likely to get injured versus somebody who maybe does not yet have that level of strength.
Right.
So we often, yes,
we love a noodle.
Exactly. And sometimes the noodles, it's because their limbs, like we see the dancers who grow where
Yes.
like, it's like all limbs when they first grow. And all of a sudden you're like,
They're just Bambi.
Bambi, exactly. And then eventually their torso catches up and eventually they build back that strength. But temporarily there's like a transient decrease in strength. And so they're really vulnerable to injury at that point in time. Right. And then that risk sort of decreases. And that's kind of why I always joke with people that my clients are all between the ages of 11 and 14. And then they, grow into their bodies, they build their strength back, they've like, done the work, and then they're totally fine until there's maybe a random acute injury or something.
Right.
But of the kind of like more overuse training injuries, they're the most common in those ages.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point, which I also, again, like hadn't really thought about. There's a bit of a window of like potential injury where we are going through that, like those big growth spurts in adolescence for girls and young women. Like there really is sort of that window, and you don't really think about that in terms of sort of like a prime area of like, hey, this is where we need to give a little extra TLC. This is where we need to have a little more care in how we're training like for dance educators, how we're training these bodies. Like it all plays together. And I think that's such a smart thing to be aware of as dance educators, that, and two, in that 11, we all know that 11 to 14, there's a lot of increased technique. Like that's a real prime time of getting them to where they need to be, all that nonsense.
Yeah.
That really clashes a little bit. The more to think about that, well, and it really clashes.
Interesting too, because if you look at like syllabus training, and again, like I'm not going to harp on this too much, but like let's look at say RAD or IC, it doesn't actually matter. Yeah. You go through the grades and you get up to like grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, and those syllabus are quite like difficult, or they start to become more robust and a lot more like sort of like difficulty in terms of like the complexity of steps that dancers are doing and things like that. But then when we get up into like sort of the majors, when you go to intermediate foundation, it's quite basic. Like again, like robustness of the syllabus. There are things in it that are harder, and it's the introduction of like point work, for instance, in a ballet dancer. So there are things that are a progression. But when you actually look at some of like the complexity and even like the volume of work in that syllabus compared to like a grade 6 syllabus, it's less. For sure. And that is intentional. There is an intentional kind of like return to basics almost. And obviously it's not like dropping back down to like grade 2 level basics, but there is an increased focus on some of that foundational stuff in like an intermediate foundation type syllabus. And I don't think people necessarily appreciate that that is how it is meant to be taught and meant to be done. And there's often this like real big push to like push kids like into the majors.
Yes.
But if we're following that sort of like linear path, they should hit intermediate foundation kind of when they're hitting like an adolescent growth spurt. Often what's happening now is kids are actually doing it when they're younger than that. And so it doesn't quite like line up how it was meant to line up.
Right.
But that was in some ways intentionally done to kind of refine some of that like technical base before then getting much more difficult when you get to intermediate. Because again, intermediate foundation to intermediate then is a big jump.
Yeah.
And then obviously when you get up into like advanced 1, advanced 2, like there's big jumps in there. But intermediate foundation is purposefully meant to focus a bit more on the fundamentals, and there's slightly less complexity than in, say, like a grade 6 syllabus.
Oh my gosh, that grade 6 syllabus, I feel like it's probably not true, but like that plie exercise at the bar, I'm like, I swear it's 4 minutes, like 2 minutes on both sides, like 100%.
Yeah.
And like, it's beautiful and like performance based, but like, it is like, it is choreography, and it's a different level.
Yeah. And it is. It's a different, it like serves a different purpose than
100%.
The other, exams are. And so I do think, like you said, it is something that teachers really do need to be aware of. And it's tricky because it happens at a different age for every dancer. And so you literally are like, all right, well, there's like 4 or 5 years of time where there's going to be a dancer going through like a big growth spurt.
Yeah.
So it is impossible to completely change like all of your training. But I do think, especially for dancers, if you have dancers who are doing solos and they're competing, I think that is your opportunity to really kind of like honor where they're at. And maybe there's a year where you're like, okay, you are band B, you just grew 6 inches. We are not going to throw in really hard technical elements this year. This year, we're really going to focus on, you know, working on some of your artistic skill. Exactly. So technically they might get a solo that's like really basic and kind of like foundational, and then really spend the time to like develop their artistry or their musicality or their theatrics or like whatever it is that you feel that dancer could work on instead, because not every solo has to be the hardest thing that that dancer can physically do. And oftentimes it probably shouldn't be. And especially at that age range, because again, in groups it's really hard to manage that, but
of course in a solo,
in individually it's much easier. I think it's also for parents, like it almost becomes one of like the harder selling points is, you know, I think if dancers are not progressed through, you know, say, again, if you're following exams, like levels where a teacher says, you know, I want them spending 2 years doing this level or whatever, oftentimes that's like considered to be like a negative, like my dancer's being held back or they're not. And oftentimes it's just like, no, this is like where they're at. And then once they kind of build this foundational strength and they kind of, you know, then oftentimes they really accelerate after that.
For sure.
Evens out at the end of the day, but it is hard. I think we get a lot of resistance or pushback from parents and stuff who just want their kid doing something harder and harder and harder and harder all the time, when really there are times to push and then there's times to like pull back and work on other things.
Yeah. Part of like the reason I'm doing this is I'm like, everybody heard Erika say it doesn't need to be the hardest solo in the world. We just don't need to do that. We just don't. We don't. And I will say as an adjudicator too, I see all of these like pieces and, you know, this technical amazingness. And then I'm like, I got nothing. I'm like, are you enjoying your life? Do you have joy? Do you have passion? You know, the thing that kind of like got you here in the first place? Like, we all got to get on this. We're all saying the same thing. Again, one of the reasons I like want to do this podcast, I'm like, we're all saying it doesn't need to be hardest thing. We don't need all these Alice Akon pump turns. And I'm like, and then every solo I see, and I'm like, okay, so the have to start matching.
It's also like a way to differentiate yourself. Because like you said, if every 13-year-old jazz solo has every one of these tricks and elements in it, they all look the same. And all of them can like rehearse that same skill over to the point that it looks polished on stage. But if you have a kid who comes on and maybe the choreography is not that hard, but they have been working on like, I don't know, like Fosse all year and come out and just nail it, like the adjudicator is going to see that dancer in a sea of Alice Akon pump turns, like when everything kind of looks the same. So I think oftentimes like it actually is advantageous to like come out and be doing something that is different.
I agree with you. 100%. And also memorable. I am going to remember that dance. I'm like, that kid's getting a special. The amount of specials I give out for the most random reasons, but I'm like, I see you. And that's like you say, the teachers who are working with what they have and who they have in that time frame. And I think it's so important for us to remember, it's just, I know we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in terms of creating or helping, but it's like, there's more than just this season. There's more than just this solo. Like you gotta, again, like my favorite thing, you gotta zoom out and look at this kid's life. Like there's more to it. There was more before this that got them here. And then there's going to be more after. This is just a solo. This is just a season. We don't need to, one of my college profs, she's like, if you put everything you know how to do in one dance, you're only ever going to make one dance. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I don't need to put everything in there. Like it doesn't have to be, we don't have to hinge it all on this. I feel like I'm so just getting folks who agree with me, but I also think there is a shift how we're approaching dance. And I hope that it becomes a little bit more practical and less chit chatty about it, and that we're seeing it. And if I can be a part of that and you can be a part of it, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now is the lightning round, which is never a lightning round because no dancer can ever just answer these questions. I haven't had like a dance adjacent like health practitioner on yet. So I've had to like adjust some of these questions. Do you have a favorite genre for you to dance, like that you enjoy doing?
Yeah. So ballet is still my favorite. Like that's what I still do like on a weekly basis. And again, it's like the technical elements, I think. Back when I was dancing like more, I would probably have said contemporary was my favorite. But nowadays, I still like contemporary, but ballet.
I feel that way too. As I get older, I'm like, just give me like a solid hour bar class at the bar. Like I will stay. Speaking of which, do you have a favorite ballet bar exercise?
Ooh.
Because Austin and I have the same one, so I'm very excited to see.
That's a really good question. I mean, my gut response is going to be anything but frappes. It's kind of a running joke. Like every time the teacher who I do class with regularly, she mostly like doesn't do frappes, but once in a blue moon, she'll like add an exercise in and I just like roll my eyes and she's always like, knows. Cause I'm like, I really feel like there's absolutely no reason for an adult ballet class to include frappes. And like, we get into an argument about it all the time. So in terms of favorite exercise, I mean, honestly, like plies. Like I don't think you can beat like a really good, solid, foundational plie exercise. And
if you know how to do it right,
that's what I was going to say. I feel like I always hear my teachers like in the background being like, you should be dripping sweat by the end of plies. You can work as hard as you want in a plie exercise. And so I feel like I would maybe, I don't know if I really truly have a favorite bar exercise, but just no frappes.
No frappes. I only like flexed foot frappes. If it's pointed, I don't like that.
Don't like any of them.
But I'll take a flex.
Because like I tapped a lot growing up, and I feel like people who tapped like frappe. I don't know,
that ankle action.
Exactly. But no, frappe is not my thing.
Yeah, I like a good plie exercise. It's a real ease into class, I think.
Yeah. I feel like I grew up with a couple of South African teachers, and they often would do like kind of like reverse arms for plies and stuff. So like a good exercise with a nice reverse arm. Like
Oh, that's fun. Okay, yeah, I'm in. If I had reverse arms for plies, that would also be really nice. I love that. Dancers are known. I already had my coffee today, so I'm on to water. But we are notorious coffee drinkers. Are you a coffee drinker? And what is your coffee order?
I am not a coffee drinker, controversially.
No, you're not the first person who's not a coffee drinker.
Yeah, so I drink tea, but do not drink coffee.
What's your favorite type of tea?
I just in the morning I like a good black, just like an English breakfast or whatever. And I also really love like a really good Earl Grey. That tends to be more of an afternoon tea for me. I don't know.
Great. Okay, great. You and Aaliyah Rumper are the tea drinkers.
Okay.
So
why we get along.
You're in great company. Yeah. Brilliant women drinking tea. Okay, I got to change. Maybe I got to get on the tea. I'm already on the tea bandwagon, but okay. I haven't refined exactly how to ask this question.
Okay.
Because I want to use the term ugly. And again, this is me asking people questions that I've asked myself and figured out myself. So through dance and therapy, I really realized like my personality and the things that maybe were ugly about me that dance either exacerbated or also drew me to dance. So like I can be quite competitive and I can feel quite jealous. So I'm always curious to know what's the ugliest thing, or maybe not such a pretty thing that you've learned about yourself that you learned through dance, because we do really find a lot of our identity in and through that art form.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the thing that I've probably like as an adult and most recently been like working on that was very apparent, and I feel like dance actually kind of like probably drove this a lot, and is really common in a lot of dancers, is like perfectionism. Like I am the very classic perfectionist kind of people pleaser, and I feel like that was really, I think that was my personality anyway, and then it just was like the absolute perfect environment to like 100%. Exploit that like 100%. So then to have to like as an adult now kind of like unlearn some of that perfectionism, especially in business, where it's just like done is better than perfect. And it's like the number of times that is like reciting in my brain on a daily basis.
Yes.
So I would say that's probably, yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, just because it's like the most recent that, yeah, I still deal with.
Yeah. You're not alone. I feel like the like subtitle of this is like a bunch of perfectionists like talking about how they're getting better.
Totally.
And this is a question I love to talk about. I'm so glad you like it came up organically, because I often wonder if dance attracts perfectionist type A folks because of what it is, and or if it creates or exacerbates, I think, part two.
And
but I think it's such like, I'm like, this needs to be researched, you guys. Like, we really need to like, because it's really interesting, and it could really shape how we teach and how we deal with these.
Yeah, how you work with dancers. And I think it's both. Well, and so I think dance, like attracts some of those kids that are already like that. But then I also think it feeds the beast. Like it's one of those, your plie you could never perfect a plie. And that's what attracts me to it. That's why I still go to ballet class now. 40 some years later.
Yeah.
I can still work on a plie in first position. Like there are still things that I can like work on. And so, I think it's probably some of both, but it is such an interesting topic. It also, I know these are supposed to be like lightning rounds.
Oh no, like I said, I'm calling it the lightning round. It's not at all.
I know I do like rapid fire questions at the end of my podcast. I'm like, these aren't rapid, but that's fine. But in the clinic, when I'm working with dancers, it is something we often have to address, because that kind of perfectionism like shows up often in them almost like, I don't want to use the word like cheating, because it's like not what it is, but like our bodies are really good at finding the path of least resistance. And when a dancer who has this ideal of like perfectionism, but their body, like they, potentially have like a strength deficit or something that they're working on, that often becomes really challenging, because they will just do it in a way that is not actually serving them. And so it's the kids who like race through an exercise because they're actually using momentum because they don't have the strength to control the movement, or the kids who, it can show up in all sorts of different ways, but we have to have that conversation a lot of the time where I'm like, I don't actually want it to be perfect, but I want it to be done in a way that's like accomplishing the goal we're after. And if that doesn't look perfect at the beginning, like, so be it. That's what it needs to be. And some of the dancers really struggle with that, like in terms of like rehab exercises. So it's something, yes, we see a lot of.
Yeah. I say to my kid, the things that I say now as a teacher, I like full out say to my students, like, if I was a student, like Leslie, the student listening to Leslie, the teacher right now, hates Leslie, the teacher right now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to hear what I got to say right now at all, because I'm going to tell you what I really don't want to hear as a perfectionist. And I found, as I've learned about my learning style, and which is also part of from perfectionism, I also really like to observe. Like, I will watch that combination 4 times. I would rather watch it and then try to do it once as perfectly as possible than just go for it, which is not a good way to learn, you guys. No. I'm going to tell you, it's not great. But I recognize it about myself now. Yeah. And so now I'm telling kids, I'll see kids and I'm like, I will give you 2 opportunities to watch it, because I want you to feel good and safe about it.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to make you do it regardless if you want to. But I wonder if that learning through observation is a learning style that is paired with, I've never actually really kind of put 2 and 2 together before. If that's paired with perfection, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I don't know, but certainly in my son's case, like,
I'm going to ask my therapist. I'm going to text her today.
It seems to be, it seems to hold true in that case. So it wouldn't surprise me. And definitely I still also like observing as well. So
And then I'm trying to be an example as well. And I'm like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to try. That's this whole podcast. Like, I'm just trying. I'm just starting before I'm ready. Things I can control. Okay. I appreciate that. What is the best lesson you think you've learned from dance?
Ooh, I don't know if there's just one.
I know it's like asking a favorite ice cream, but
I know. Well, that's an easier question. No, I'm joking.
Probably
lesson I've learned through dance. I think just to like trust myself. I think people often ask me, like, I'll get questions about like, oh, like, how did you get into like running a business or opening your own clinic or like and like, I don't know. Like, I
I
just
know.
do
Do
things. And I
it.
think that dance was the thing that allowed me to just trust myself and the process, and I'll figure it out and I'll get it done. And yeah, I think that's one of the big lessons.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Trust yourself. And also that feeling of like, I will be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that's like I think that's something we don't really give enough weight to in terms of dance. Like, oh, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this quick change, I'm gonna figure it out. I have 30 seconds, so I gotta figure it out. That's a very good, it's a very good life lesson. This has been so lovely. This is the question I like to end with because I do always want to inspire folks and I don't want you to feel any pressure. What's your one, like, sort of your favorite nugget of wisdom that you would want to leave with our audience today?
So many. I think just based on some of like the conversation we were already having, I think I would just say like trust the process and that not everything has to happen at the same time for every dancer. And so whether that is advice that a teacher takes on board or a dancer takes on board or a parent takes on board,
We
I
can all
think
take it.
exactly. It can apply to everyone, but
For sure.
really, dancers all mature at different paces, like bloom at different rates, whatever analogy you want to use. And I think just like trust the process, because the number of dancers who you see who, when they were 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe felt like they were behind. They started late. They weren't the most flexible. They weren't the whatever, name a billion things.
Yeah.
They actually go on and have some of like the most successful careers.
Yes. Yes.
And that is not necessarily just a performing career. Like that might be that they go into stage management, maybe they go into healthcare, maybe they go into something else. But I think just trust the process. There's like a reason that it exists, and we don't necessarily need to just keep like racing through and trying to accelerate the process. It can often be more advantageous just to go with the flow and trust the process.
Yeah. Which again, if you tend to be a little type A, perfectionist
Real
is
hard.
not the best thing to hear. But also from two folks who are like all along the pathway of that, you should listen to it. Listen to it when you're younger than when you're older. I say this at the end of every episode, but like I so enjoy having these discussions and bringing these topics forward, because I just needs to happen more out in the world and with care and compassion and kindness. So can you please, because we had alluded to this already, you also host a podcast. So can you tell us about the podcast, what it's called and where we can find it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called the Dance Physio Podcast. So not the most original title, but easy to find.
Love it.
You can find it on all the major podcast platforms. Perfect. So Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to podcasts. Episodes come out every Tuesday. So it's a weekly podcast. Some are solo episodes, some are guest episodes, and we talk about anything and everything about dancer health and wellness. So a lot of the episodes, especially the solo ones, are kind of like injury specific-y type stuff. So if people are like, oh, I really want to learn more about, I don't know, patellar tendinopathy or like whatever, it doesn't, Achilles issues, whatever it is, there's probably a podcast episode. Cool. If there is not one, send me a message. I'll add it to my list. And then a lot of the guest ones are more similar conversations like this, but with different experts in different fields, dance medicine and dance science. And yeah, we just have great conversations about dancer health and wellness.
I love it. Also, what a great day. Tuesday, you can download Erika's podcast and you can listen to us. Just have a whole dance podcast day. I love it. Yeah. On your drive to work, if you're that kind of dance teacher, listen to stuff before you go to work. Also I'll make sure to link that in the show notes so folks can listen to that. But also, if they want to follow you on the internets, where can they find you?
Yes, the internets. I'm mostly on Instagram. I'm at Dance Physio Erika, and Erika is with a K. I'm on Facebook as well, but like honestly, things just get lost on that platform. So if you want to message me or anything, do it on Instagram. My clinic is called Allegro Performance and Wellness, and so our website is allegroperformance.com, and that also has contact information. There's links to the podcast from the website, and there's also a lot of resources, like education resources for dance teachers and some for dancers, although I've gone more in the direction of dance teacher resources. So there's kind of online courses and little downloads and things like that if people are interested in that.
Yes, I can attest to Erika's incredible library and options for dance teachers to learn and just again more tools in your tool belt to help your students. And I'll make sure that that's all below, so it's all very clickable and everyone can find you, because you are such an awesome resource that I know not just for people in British Columbia, but for any dancer, especially if you do live in maybe a more underserved community. Connect with Erika. Y'all just listen to her for an hour. She's amazing. She's so brilliant and kind and realistic. And we just need more folks like you. So I want to thank you so much for your time, because like I said, I know you're a busy lady, and this has been so wonderful.
Yeah, it's been so fun. Thank you so much for having me on, and it was great to chat, and hopefully we'll get to chat again soon.
Yes, anytime. Thank you. And thank you for listening to Dancing Through It. We will be back with another episode next Tuesday on YouTube. We'll see you there. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Dancing Through It. Connect with the Dancing Through It community over on Instagram and follow me at Leslie Cooney. The Lonely Island and Seth Meyers have a podcast now.
Okay.
Like Andy Samberg and like a couple of his friends, they're The Lonely Island. It's a Saturday Night Live thing.
Yeah.
So, but they're always like, I love you, like as they leave. And I'm just like, oh, it makes my heart so, like, I look forward to it. Like every time I listen, I'm not pretending Andy Samberg saying I love you to me.
Not at all.
Yeah.